Hey, advanced programming, we are going to take a look at making a object inside of Physica that we can control with our keyboard. So this is going to relate to the Pong project, and here we go. We have our character, this big black circle as I'm pressing keys, WASD. I'm making the character move around, and I'm fighting against the tide of falling things, which is always amusing. So, how are we doing this? So the story is actually pretty simple. First of all, the main thing to know about making an object that you're going to control or affect in some way in Physica is that you have to create a variable, a permanent variable, a global variable in our case, that will remember what that thing is. I'll show you. For example, here is my thing. I made an F circle. You can make whatever you want. Eventually, for your Pong project, you're probably gonna choose a circle or a box, a F circle or F box. And what's the story with the F circle being here? And why didn't we do it for all those things that are falling down? Well, the answer is that for all these things that are falling, we just made temporary variables, right? For all these little birds and circles and green boxes and yellow blobs. When we make those, we just made a temporary variable. A good example of that would be even for the ramps. We made a temporary variable right here in this make top platform. When we make a circle, we made a temporary variable here. We made a blob, we made a temporary variable here. So the reason why now we're going to, for our controlled or user affected stuff, we're going to make a variable up here is because we actually need to have a link to that, a pointer to that, in order for us to send it messages, like tell it to set its velocity, and so on. So that's the first part. You might wonder, why don't we do that for everything else? Well, it would get pretty cluttered if we had variables up here for everything, and honestly, we don't need to control the platform, for example. So let's not keep all that data cluttering up our project. Let's just let Physica handle that. But yeah, we have that here. Note that right now this is a null pointer. It does not exist yet, so we're going to have to instantiate it. So we'll take a look at that. Also, I have two other variables here, vx and by, good old vx and by, or dx and dy, I think we might have actually called it last year. The velocity in the x direction, the velocity in the y direction. So yeah, whatever letter you put in front of it, that's what we're referring to. Okay, so first step is in the setup. All this stuff has not changed, but now I've added in this new part. I'm instantiating or creating the F circle in that constructor there. It requires the radius to be sent. You can, whatever shape you create, you can just use the appropriate constructor like we saw last class. I'm setting its color to black just to make it look different than everything else, but you can do whatever you want. Just a reminder that set fill works with these numbers, but if I wanted to use some of my color variables that I made before, if I wanted to say red, I think red was one of the choices. Yeah, if I wanted to say red, it won't work. I'd have to say set fill color, which is kind of weird, but that's fine. I'm just going to leave it as 0. That also applies to set stroke and set stroke color. And next I'm just going to set its position. It's just going to start somewhere on purpose. You can decide how you want to do that for your project. And of course, then I add it to the world. So once I add it to the world will start, the Physica, the physics engine, I should say, will start applying all the forces to it, gravity, all that kind of stuff. So things will start happening. For your Pong project, you're going to want to turn off gravity because it doesn't make sense for there to be gravity unless you have a reason for there to be gravity. You might redefine the project a bit. But here's the story right here. This is how I'm setting gravity. So for Pong, you'd probably make that 0 and that 0 as well. Anyways, now it's good to go. I forgot to mention something last class that'll be important. That's in the draw function. There's some code here that we're going to be looking at in a minute. But before we go to that code, take a look at these two pieces of code. It's sort of the instrumental lines of code that you need. World.step world.draw. So basically, step and draw are step. Whoa, I'm not sure what's happening there. Step will get the physics engine to do all the calculation of forces and to apply those forces and to cause bouncing and collisions and all that stuff to happen. And we do that every frame to update what's happening in the world. If you don't do world.step, no physics happen. It's like the world is frozen in time, which is kind of useless. So but you could probably think of a mechanic where that could be useful, perhaps, to turn it off. But generally, we're just going to always be doing world.step at the end of our draw function. And then world.draw is what then takes what's in the world and puts it onto the screen. So again, without that, you would see no blobs, no circles, no F boxes, all that stuff would not show up. These are essential. And I always just put them at the end of a draw function. Do all your stuff up here and then go from there. Okay, anyways, now we need to make our, or I'm calling it P1 because I'm thinking it's player 1. We have to actually make it move around. So let's just look at this. This is review from last year. A void key pressed and void key released function allows us to read what key is being pressed or released, and then we can use some Boolean variables. I just have a W, A, S, and D variable to set them to true or false. Here's those variables up here: Boolean, W, A, S, D. And then, when you press a key and release a key, you're going to set those variables to true or false. So you can always count on the W variable representing whether or not you have pressed the W key. It's going to be true if you're holding the W key down, and it will be false if you're not holding it down. Yeah? Makes sense? So that's all from last year. Here is me actually using that. I have these if statements to say, hey, if W is true, you could actually put in equals true if you want to, or you could just say if W, because W is true or false, right? It's a Boolean variable. Then I just set velocity, and I set that velocity, I set that velocity, I set that velocity, and so on. So when I press W, I set Vy to negative 200. Negative means going up. Remember, upside down y-axis. I have to always keep that in mind. And then A is left, so Vx is negative 200, and so on. These units are not obvious what they are. I would recommend just play with the numbers and see what different values give you. You'll find that 200 is by no means excessive. It's not in terms of pixels per frame like we did last year. And then at all that stuff is great, but it doesn't do anything unless you do this. And this is why we have that P1 variable declared at the top as a global variable, because we can still affect the thing after we've added it to the world. So P1 has been added to the world, but we still have a reference to it, a link to it, a pointer to it. It's called P1, and you can say P1.setVelocity. So the thing in the world, its velocity will get set to whatever Vx and Vy is. We probably want this thing to stop. If you'll notice, with this current code, if I run this, I just said tap W, and it just goes up. And if I tap S, it just goes down. And then D, you can't not go up or down after pressing up or down. So you probably want it to also slow down or degrade. So there's a lot of different ways to do that. I'm almost tempted to just let you take that out, actually. That might be a useful problem to solve. So think about how would you write an if statement to say if you're not, you could do it a number of ways. You could say if you're not pressing left or right, set Vx to, that's not left. If you're pressing left or right, if you're not pressing left and not pressing right, then set Vx to 0. There we go. I got the words out. Yay. Similarly, if you're not pressing up and you're not pressing down, then set Vy to 0. And then you'd actually stop when you let go of the keys or delete your code. Whoops. Also, last but not least, there's some potential here for you to sort of degrade the speed, for it to decelerate. So you could do something similar to what we just talked about, but instead of setting Vx or Vy to 0, you could multiply it by a number between 0 and 1, like 0.95 or something. And then it would sort of decelerate. It would, get smaller and smaller, and eventually get very, very close to 0. And close enough to 0 that it would look like it stopped. So you can do a similar thing of code there. So that's going to be part of what we're going to do today. Anyways, this is a little example for you to try out. You could do it inside of here. And then when you're done that, you're going to start making your Pong game. You'll then know how to move your paddles around. It's not really Pong, it's more like air hockey. You're going to be able to move the paddles around. You're going to have a ball that's going to move around. And you can start working on designing the world as well. You're going to want to have walls at the top and bottom. I use an F poly for that. You could use 3 F boxes for the top and 3 F boxes for the bottom. You could use 1 F poly for the top and 1 F poly for the bottom. It's up to you, but make some kind of walls around the top and bottom so the ball will bounce off of it. And then, of course, you need a net, a gap on the left or right so that the ball can pass through that gap. And then, once it passes through a net, then the opposite side scores a point. So you have to develop sort of that reporting out of points and such. Just so you know, all the existing things that we know about still work. So, like, you could use text to draw the score, for example. I'll give you a good example. Here's good old ellipse. It's this width divided by 2, height divided by 2, 400, 400. We can still draw good old-fashioned things. Notice I'm doing it after the world is drawn, so then it'll be on top of whatever is drawn in the world. So you can, here's our big circle. Like, it's not going to have any physics acted upon it. It's not inside of the physics engine, but we can still draw the user interface. Like, notice it's not actually doing anything, but you can use text to draw stuff, or you can have user interface stuff that reports back to the user, buttons and that kind of stuff as well. So that's totally doable right after draw. Okay, so try and make some progress today on your Fisica Pong game, and I look forward to seeing how things go. Hopefully I'll be back by next class. Okay, bye.